Ash drifted like gray snow across the plain, clinging to the fur of the Dai warriors as they formed a tightening ring. Their spears were long, bone-tipped, and steady, held by hands that had never learned to tremble. At the center of the circle lay a cub, small even by Dai standards, his breathing shallow and uneven. Each rasping inhale sounded too loud in the thin air, as if the world itself were listening and waiting for him to fail. Kale stood just beyond the ring alone, helmet tucked under one arm, hands open and deliberately empty. He was keenly aware of how fragile he looked to them, soft-skinned, narrow-shouldered, a creature that had no claws and no fangs worth naming. The translator at his throat murmured fragments of Dai's speech into his ear, but the tone mattered more than the words. The warriors were not shouting. They did not need to. Silence, among the Dai, was the language of imminent violence. The cub scent reached them all, sharp with sickness and blood. Kale recognized it even without training in Dai biology. He had smelled it on human children in field hospitals and refugee camps across 3 systems. The smell of a body losing a fight it did not understand how to win. One of the warriors shifted, spear angling a fraction closer to Kale's chest. Another bared his teeth, a ritual display meant to warn, not threaten. Kale swallowed and resisted the instinct to step back. Retreat would be read as prey behavior. Advance would be read as challenge. The margin for misunderstanding was razor-thin, and he was standing barefoot on it. "I am here to help," he said, keeping his voice low and even. The translator hesitated, then rendered his words into the clicking consonants of the Dai tongue. Several warriors stiffened. Help was not a concept that translated cleanly. The Dai believed in victory, endurance, and survival. Assistance implied deficiency, and deficiency was a private failure, not a shared burden. The Alpha stepped forward at last. He was massive, even among his kind, his fur marked with old scars that spoke of battles survived rather than won cleanly. His eyes, gold-ringed and unblinking, fixed on Kale with clinical intensity. He did not raise his spear. He did not need to. "Why do you approach the unfit?" the Alpha asked. Kale forced himself to meet that gaze. "Because he is dying." A murmur rippled through the circle, sharp and disapproving. The cub's weakness was not denied, but naming it aloud carried a weight Kale had not anticipated. Among the Dai, death was acknowledged only after it had occurred. To speak of it early was seen as an insult to the fight itself. "He is of our blood," the Alpha said. "His fate is ours to witness." Kale nodded slowly. "I don't dispute that. I only ask to stand with him." The Alpha's ears flicked, a gesture Kale's briefings had described as confusion edged with irritation. "You would touch him?" "Yes." Several spears lifted in perfect unison, their tips glinting faintly. Kale felt the air change, the moment stretching taut. Touching a dying cub was taboo. The Dai believed that struggle, not comfort, prepared the spirit for whatever came next. To interfere was to weaken the pack as a whole. Kale took a single step forward anyway. The translator lagged behind his intent, but intent, he had learned, was something predators understood instinctively. He was not charging. He was not posturing. He was choosing, openly and without armor, to be vulnerable in the presence of creatures who had no cultural reason to spare him. The cub whimpered, a thin, broken sound. One of the warriors flinched before he could stop himself. Kale noticed. He catalogued it with the same part of his mind that once noted which soldiers cracked first under artillery fire. Strength was never as uniform as cultures pretended. "I won't take him from you," Kale said. "I won't dishonor him. I just don't believe anyone should die alone." The words translated poorly. Alone was rendered as without pack, without witness. The Alpha's grip tightened on his spear. For a long moment, Kale thought this was where it would end, with a clean thrust and a report that the human envoy had overstepped. Instead, the Alpha looked down at the cub. The small body shuddered, then stilled for a heartbeat too long. The Alpha did not kneel. Alphas did not kneel. But something in his posture shifted, a barely perceptible lowering of the shoulders that spoke of a weight he carried but never named. You have one breath, the Alpha said at last. One motion. If you bring dishonor, you will not finish it. Kale released the breath he had been holding and stepped into the circle. The spears did not lower, but they did not advance. He knelt beside the cub, movement slow, deliberate, his every action framed by a dozen watchful eyes. Up close, the cub looked impossibly young. His fur was matted, his limbs thin, his chest fluttering like a trapped bird. Kale reached out, then paused, aware that this was the moment that would define him in their eyes. He placed 2 fingers lightly against the cub's brow, feeling heat, feverish and wrong. The cub's eyes cracked open, unfocused, but they fixed on Kale with something like curiosity. Kale felt a familiar ache spread through his chest, old and unwelcome. He had sworn, more than once, that he would stop letting this part of himself dictate his actions. He had failed every time. Around them, the circle held. Spears hovered. The Alpha watched, unreadable. Kale leaned closer, aware that whatever he did next would not be understood in the way he meant it. He only knew that turning away now would be the greater betrayal, not of the Dai, but of himself. He closed the distance, his decision made, and the world seemed to draw inward, waiting to see whether weakness or strength would speak first. The cub's breathing hitched as Kale leaned closer, each shallow rise of the chest a quiet argument against time. The heat beneath Kale's fingers was alarming, but not unfamiliar. He had seen bodies burn themselves out in desperate attempts to survive. Around them, the Dai warriors remained statues of coiled intent, their spears unwavering, their eyes fixed on the smallest motion of the human's hands. Kale drew in a slow breath and removed his helmet completely, setting it on the ground where everyone could see it. The act was deliberate. Armor was distance. He needed none of it now. Cool air brushed his face, carrying the copper-sour scent of blood and illness. He ignored the warning pulse of fear in his chest and focused on the cub, on the fragile rhythm of a life slipping away. He tried first to help in the only way he knew how. His fingers traced along the cub's neck and chest, searching for signs his limited training might interpret. The physiology was wrong, muscle placement unfamiliar, pulse faint and uneven in places where it should have been strong. Whatever was killing the cub was beyond him. The realization settled heavily, not as panic, but as certainty. The Alpha shifted, a low sound vibrating in his throat. It was not impatience. It was expectation. The Dai did not linger over lost causes. A warrior either rose or fell. Anything in between was indulgence. Kale felt the weight of their judgment pressing on him. He could step back now. He had fulfilled the letter of his permission. He had touched, observed, confirmed what they already knew. Retreat would be clean, perhaps even respected. He did not move. The cub's eyes fluttered again, unfocused but searching. A small clawed hand twitched against the ground, scraping weakly at the ash. The sound was almost nothing, yet it cut through Kale with surgical precision. He reached out, wrapping his fingers gently around the cub's hand, careful not to grip, careful not to restrain. A ripple passed through the circle. One of the younger warriors inhaled sharply before catching himself. The Alpha's ears angled forward, attention sharpening. Kale was no longer simply observing. He was engaging. "This will not make him stronger," the Alpha said. "No," Kale replied quietly, "but it might make it hurt less." The translator struggled with the phrase. Hurt was rendered as suffering without enemy, a concept that sat uneasily in the Dai tongue. Pain, to them, was purposeful. It forged. It tested. Pain without gain was meaningless. Kale leaned closer still, lowering himself until his forehead nearly brushed the cub's. He could feel the tremors running through the small body now, the fight reaching its last, disorganized stage. There was nothing left to fix, only something left to give. He hesitated, acutely aware of the eyes on him, of the spears that could end him in a heartbeat. Then he pressed a gentle kiss to the cub's forehead. The gesture was soft, almost weightless. It carried no claim, no dominance, no ritual of conquest. It was a farewell offered freely, without expectation of return. The reaction was immediate and absolute. A collective intake of breath swept the circle, sharp and involuntary. Several warriors stiffened as if struck. One took a half-step forward before freezing, confusion writ plain across his posture. Touching the dying was forbidden. Touching with bare skin, without challenge or restraint, was unthinkable. Kale did not pull away. He remained there, his hand still loosely holding the cubs, his lips resting for a heartbeat longer than strictly necessary. He murmured words no translator carried, sounds meant only for himself and the fading consciousness beneath his touch. "It's all right," he whispered. "You did enough." The cubs' breathing slowed. The tremors eased. For a brief, impossible moment, the tension in the small body softened, as though the fight had finally found a place to rest. Then the chest stilled, the shallow rhythm fading into silence. Kale stayed where he was, eyes closed, acknowledging the end without ceremony. He felt it as a subtle absence rather than a dramatic break, a quiet departure that left the world fractionally emptier than before. When he finally lifted his head, the spears were no longer pointed at his heart. He noticed it gradually, the way one notices a storm breaking by the change in pressure rather than the sky. Weapons that had been poised to strike now hovered uncertainly, their tips dipping toward the ground. No command had been given. No signal exchanged. The warriors simply stopped. The Alpha stared at Kale as if seeing him for the first time. The rigid certainty that had defined his stance wavered, replaced by something unsettled and raw. "You shared his end," he said slowly. It was not an accusation. "Yes," Kale answered. He released the cub's hand with care and rose to his feet, keeping his movements slow. No one should face that alone. Silence followed, deeper than before. The wind stirred the ash at their feet, carrying it in small, spiraling eddies around the still form of the cub. One by one, without conscious coordination, the Dai warriors lowered their spears. The points sank into the soil, not in surrender, but in acknowledgement. Kale stood among them, unarmed and exposed, unsure whether he had just earned his death, or something far more dangerous, attention. The Alpha finally inclined his head, a fraction of a gesture that carried the weight of a verdict not yet spoken. "You have acted without strength," the Alpha said. Then, after a pause that seemed to stretch the air itself, he added, "And yet we did not strike." The words hung between them, unresolved, heavy with implication. Kale met the Alpha's gaze and held it, understanding that whatever came next would not be decided by spears alone. Behind him, the cub lay still, and the circle around him had changed forever, even if none of them yet knew how. The cub was lifted with a care that surprised even those who carried him. Two warriors moved forward, their grips firm but reverent, and bore the small body toward the inner fire pit where the Dai marked endings. Kale did not follow. He waited where he stood, hands at his sides, accepting that whatever came next would be decided without his input. The Alpha turned, and with a curt motion of his spear indicated that Kale should walk. Not away. Inward. They led him to the stone circle at the heart of the encampment, where age-smoothed slabs formed a ring older than any living warrior. The air felt heavier there, thick with the residue of countless judgments. Kale recognized the shape of it from human courts and war rooms, a place where stories were weighed against survival. He was positioned at the circle's edge. The Alpha took the center. The other warriors arranged themselves according to rank, spears grounded, eyes forward. No one spoke for a long moment. Silence, Kale was learning, was how the Dai tested the truth of things. Lies rushed to fill gaps. Truth endured the weight. "You were permitted one breath," the Alpha said at last. "You took more." "I took what was needed," Kale replied. He did not raise his voice. He did not lower his eyes. A low murmur passed through the ranks. The Alpha's gaze sharpened, but he did not bristle. "Needed for what?" "To honor him," Kale said. "To witness him." "Witnessing does not change outcome," another voice interjected. An elder stepped forward, his fur silvered with age, his movements economical. "Strength changes outcome." Kale inclined his head slightly. "Sometimes." And sometimes it only changes who survives long enough to remember. The elder studied him, measuring not the words, but the conviction behind them. "You're a species that fights," he said. "We have seen your wars. You are not strangers to strength." "No," Kale agreed. "We're not." "Then why offer softness where hardness is required?" Kale exhaled slowly. He had expected this question, though not its timing. "Because hardness alone leaves nothing worth protecting," he said. "We learned that late. Too late in some cases." The Alpha's ears flicked. "You imply regret. I imply cost." A faint, sharp sound escaped one of the younger warriors. A laugh cut off almost immediately. The Alpha did not rebuke him. Instead, he watched Kale more intently, as if the human were a puzzle assembled from mismatched pieces. "You touched death without challenge," the Alpha said. "Among us, that is weakness." Kale met his gaze. "Among us, turning away is." The words landed harder than Kale intended. A ripple of discomfort moved through the circle, subtle but undeniable. The elder's eyes narrowed. "You judge us." "I don't," Kale said quickly. "I recognize you. We were like you once. Strong. Proud. Certain that endurance was the highest virtue." "And you are no longer?" the Alpha asked. Kale hesitated, then gave a small, rueful smile. "We still are. We just learned to endure each other." Silence fell again, different this time. Not tense. Considering. The Alpha paced the circle once, his steps measured. "The cub was unfit," he said, speaking as if to the stones themselves. "He would not have survived the long seasons. His weakness would have drawn predators. His death was expected." "And yet you watched," Kale said gently. "You did not leave." The Alpha stopped. For a heartbeat, Kale thought he had overstepped at last. Then the Alpha turned back, eyes bright with something dangerously close to honesty. "We watched to remember," the Alpha said. "So, the pack does not forget the price of weakness." Kale nodded. "We watched to remember too. Just different things." The elder folded his arms. "Explain." Kale chose his words with care. "We remember that strength fails eventually. That bodies break. That survival isn't just about outlasting others, but about deciding what kind of survivors we want to be." A low, thoughtful sound moved through the gathered warriors. The Alpha returned to the center of the circle and planted his spear into the stone, not as a threat, but as a marker. "You shared his end," the Alpha said again, quieter now. "You did not gain from it. You did not challenge for status. You did not take." "No," Kale said. "I stayed." The Alpha studied him for a long moment, then inclined his head, deeper this time. "Among us," he said, "only pack may witness death so closely." Kale's breath caught despite himself. "You have no blood here," the Alpha continued. "No claim. And yet you acted as one bound." The elder stepped forward once more, placing a hand against his chest. "There is a name," he said slowly, "for those who choose burden without compulsion." The word that followed did not translate cleanly. The device at Kale's throat offered a rough approximation. "Pack brother without blood." A murmur rose, louder now, but it carried no anger. The Alpha lifted his spear from the stone and struck its butt against the ground once. The sound echoed, sharp and final. "So judged," he said. "You will not be harmed." Kale let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. "Thank you." The Alpha regarded him steadily. "Do not thank us yet. You have unsettled things that cannot be easily set back into place." Kale met his gaze, understanding the weight of that statement. "That was never my intention," he said. Then, after a pause, "But it may have been necessary." The Alpha's mouth curved in something that was not quite a smile. "We will see." Beyond the circle, the wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of ash and something else. Change, perhaps, or the first hint of a question the Dai had never thought to ask. Kale stood among them, no longer a target, not yet an ally, aware that the most dangerous part of his presence had only just begun. The rites for the cub were brief, as Dai rites always were, but they were not the same. Kale noticed the difference immediately. The body was laid near the fire instead of beyond it, within the circle rather than outside the camp's edge. No one commented on the change, yet no one objected either. The warriors stood in silence as the flames took hold, their spears grounded, their attention fixed not on the act of burning but on the space it left behind. Kale remained at the perimeter, exactly where he had been placed. Pack brother without blood was a status without precedent, and no one yet knew what distance it required. He did not intrude. He watched, as he had been permitted to do, and felt the strange weight of being both witness and catalyst. When the fire died down, the Alpha approached him alone. Without the circle of warriors, he seemed less monumental, though no less imposing. "You will leave at first light," the Alpha said. It was not a dismissal. It was a statement of sequence. "Yes," Kale replied. "My ship is ready." The Alpha studied him, then gestured toward the empty fire pit. "You stayed when there was nothing to gain," he said. "You offered comfort where none was demanded. Tell me why your kind does this." Kale considered the question carefully. "Because we learned that survival without meaning corrodes from the inside," he said. "We lost worlds before we understood that." The Alpha's gaze drifted to the dark horizon. "We teach our cubs to endure," he said. "To harden early. And many of them don't survive that lesson," Kale said, not as accusation, but as observation. The Alpha did not deny it. "No," he said. "They do not." They stood in silence, the wind moving between them, carrying ash across the plain in soft, whispering waves. Finally, the Alpha reached down and drove his spear into the ground beside the pit, leaving it there. The gesture was deliberate, unmistakable. "Strength that cannot stay its hand will eventually turn on itself," the Alpha said. "You showed us a strength that remained." Kale inclined his head. "I didn't know if you would let me live." The Alpha's mouth twitched, almost amused. "Neither did we." At dawn, Kale walked toward his ship unescorted. That, too, was new. The encampment behind him stirred with quiet activity. He noticed cubs moving closer to the center of the camp than they had before, watched by warriors who did not pretend indifference. No declarations were made. No laws rewritten. Change, Kale understood, rarely announced itself. As his ship lifted from the ash plain, Kale looked down one last time. The Alpha stood at the camp's edge, his silhouette framed against the pale light, his spear still planted in the earth. Other warriors stood nearby, not in formation, but in loose, unguarded clusters. The image burned itself into Kale's memory. The story did not remain contained to one camp. Dai travelers carried it to other circles, their voices low and careful as they spoke of the human who touched death without claiming it. Some scoffed. Some listened. All remembered. The gesture gained a name that resisted translation, a phrase that meant choosing to share burden instead of casting it away. Among the cubs, the change was quiet but profound. When one stumbled during training, he was corrected, not abandoned. When illness struck, warriors stayed nearby, spears set aside, watching not for failure but for endurance of a different kind. Death did not vanish from the Dai world, but it was no longer faced entirely alone. Kale learned of this later, through fragmented reports and careful diplomatic language. Officially, nothing had shifted. Unofficially, everything had begun to. The Alpha, now older, stood before a gathering of warriors months later and spoke words that would be repeated for generations. "We believed mercy weakened the pack," he said. "We were wrong. Mercy reveals what we are strong enough to protect." Beyond the Dai, other species took note. Humans, long known for their contradictions, were spoken of with a new caution. Not because they were the most violent or the most technologically advanced, but because they carried something unsettling into every encounter, a refusal to look away. Kale returned once, years later, invited without explanation. He found a new fire pit at the center of the camp, its stones marked with shallow carvings. When a cub died that season, a warrior knelt and pressed his forehead briefly to the small, still brow before rising again. No one objected. No one mocked the act. The Alpha met Kale's eyes across the circle and gave a single, acknowledging nod. Kale understood then that the kiss had never been the point. It had been the willingness behind it, the choice to stay, to bear witness, to treat even the weakest life as something that mattered. As his ship departed for the second time, Kale felt no triumph, only a quiet certainty. Humanity would not be remembered as the strongest species among the stars, nor the fiercest. They would be remembered as the ones who taught others that survival did not have to come at the cost of compassion, and that sometimes the most powerful act a being could offer was to refuse to turn away.